The Weight of Favoritism. I've spent most of my life feeling like I was born into the wrong family. Not because I didn't love them, or because they didn't provide for me in the material sense. They did, to an extent. But because I was never truly seen. Not the way my older brother Ethan was. Ethan was the golden child, the one my parents draped in praise and adoration, while I, Claire, was the afterthought, the shadow trailing behind his radiant light. This is the story of how that dynamic shaped me, broke me, and eventually led me to fight for something greater than myself, my niece and nephew, who deserved better than the chaos my brother created. It's the story of the most entitled thing I've ever seen someone do, and how I turned my pain into purpose. The Golden Child and the Invisible Sister. Growing up in suburban Ohio, our house was a shrine to Ethan's achievements. His soccer trophies lined the mantel, his report cards were framed on the wall, and every family gathering revolved around his latest accomplishment. Ethan was tall, broad-shouldered, with a disarming smile and hazel eyes that seemed to charm everyone he met. He was the star quarterback, the homecoming king, the kid who could do no wrong. My parents, especially my mother, saw him as their ticket to pride, their proof that they'd done something right in life. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one. Average height, mousy brown hair, brown eyes that didn't sparkle the way Ethan's did. I wasn't unattractive, but I wasn't Ethan. My mother would often say, "Claire, why can't you be more like your brother?" As if my existence was a disappointment by comparison. My father wasn't much better. He'd nod along, never challenging her, never standing up for me. I learned early on that love in our family came with conditions, and I didn't meet them. By the time I was a teenager, the favoritism had carved deep grooves into my self-esteem. Ethan could skip school, crash the family car, or talk back, and it was brushed off as boys being boys. But if I got a B on a test or forgot to do the dishes, it was a lecture about responsibility and how I needed to step up. The worst part? Ethan leaned into it. He knew he was the favorite, and he wielded that power like a weapon. He'd mock me in front of his friends, call me plain Claire, or the spare, and my parents would laugh it off, as if it were a harmless sibling jab. It wasn't. It was a constant reminder that I was less. High school was where the divide became unbearable. Ethan was a senior when I was a freshman, and his shadow loomed large. Teachers would say, "Oh, you're Ethan's sister, big shoes to fill," as if I was destined to fail in comparison. I tried to carve out my own space. I joined the debate team, wrote for the school newspaper, and excelled in my classes. But none of it mattered. My parents didn't show up to my debate tournaments or read my articles. They were too busy cheering at Ethan's games or planning his future at Ohio State, where he'd secured a football scholarship. The breaking point came during my junior year. I'd worked tirelessly to earn a spot in a prestigious summer writing program at a university in Chicago. It was fully funded, a rare opportunity for a kid like me who didn't come from wealth. I was ecstatic, dreaming of a summer away from the suffocating favoritism at home. When I told my parents, I expected at least a flicker of pride. Instead, my mother sighed and said, "That's nice, Claire, but we're focused on Ethan's college applications right now. Maybe next year you can do something less demanding." My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. I cried myself to sleep that night. My acceptance letter crumpled in my hand. It wasn't just about the program. It was the realization that no matter what I did, it would never be enough. Ethan was the sun, and I was a distant planet, orbiting in his shadow. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would stop seeking their approval. I would build a life where I didn't need it. The cost of envy. Ethan's charmed life didn't last forever. After high school, he went to Ohio State, where he partied more than he studied. His football career fizzled out after a knee injury, and without the structure of sports, he spiraled. He flunked out of college in his second year, came home, and started working odd jobs, bartending, construction, whatever paid the bills. My parents, of course, bailed him out every time. They paid his rent, covered his car payments, and even bought him a new truck when his old one broke down. "He's just finding his way," my mother would say, as if I hadn't been finding my way without their help my entire life. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my studies. I graduated high school with a 4.0 GPA and earned a full scholarship to a small liberal arts college in Michigan. I majored in journalism, determined to make a name for myself. College was my escape, a place where I could finally be Claire, not Ethan's sister. I thrived there, writing for the campus newspaper, interning at local publications, and building a portfolio that landed me a job at a mid-sized newspaper in Cleveland after graduation. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Ethan, on the other hand, was unraveling. He'd gotten married to his high school sweetheart, Jessica, a woman as entitled as he was. They had 2 kids, Liam, now 8, and Sophie, 6, and their marriage was a disaster. Ethan's temper, which had always been excused as passion when he was younger, turned volatile. Jessica wasn't much better. She'd grown up spoiled, and together they were a toxic mix of entitlement and dysfunction. My parents, predictably, doted on their grandkids, but ignored the chaos Ethan and Jessica created. They'd babysit Liam and Sophie, shower them with gifts, and pretend Ethan's outbursts didn't exist. I stayed out of it as much as I could. I'd moved to Cleveland, built a life with friends and a career, and started therapy to unpack the damage my family had done. Therapy was a revelation. I learned words like narcissism and scapegoat, and I began to understand that my parents' favoritism wasn't my fault. But it didn't erase the hurt. Every holiday when I'd visit home, my mother would find ways to belittle me. "You're still at that little paper?" she'd say. Or, "When are you going to settle down like Ethan?" As if his train wreck of a life was something to aspire to. The most entitled thing I'd ever seen Ethan do came when I was 28, 3 years into my job at the newspaper. I'd just been promoted to investigative reporter, a role I'd worked tirelessly for. I was covering local corruption, digging into stories that mattered, and I felt like I was finally making a difference. I went home for Thanksgiving, hoping to share the news with my family. I should have known better. At dinner, my uncle asked about my job, and for once, the conversation turned to me. I started talking about my promotion, about a story I was working on exposing a city council member's shady deals. My uncle was impressed, asking follow-up questions, and for a moment, I felt seen. Then Ethan cut in. "Claire's always been good at stirring up trouble," he said with a smirk. "But let's talk about something actually interesting, like my new business idea." He launched into a half-baked pitch for a sports bar he wanted to open, despite having no experience or capital. My parents hung on his every word, nodding enthusiastically, while my uncle's questions about my work were forgotten. Later that night, Ethan cornered me in the kitchen. "You need to stop acting like you're better than me," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Mom and Dad don't care about your little articles. They're helping me with the bar, and I need you to chip in too." I was stunned. He expected me to give him money I'd earned through years of hard work, for a pipe dream he'd probably abandon in a month. When I refused, he laughed. "You've always been selfish, Claire. No wonder you're alone." I left the next morning, vowing to cut contact. But Ethan's entitlement was about to reach a new low, one that would pull me back into the family drama I'd tried so hard to escape. The drop-off. It was a Saturday morning in early spring, and I was enjoying a rare day off. My apartment in Cleveland was my sanctuary, cozy, filled with books and plants, a stark contrast to the chaos of my childhood home. I was sipping coffee, scrolling through emails, when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I assumed it was a delivery. When I opened the door, I froze. Liam and Sophie stood on my doorstep, each clutching a backpack. Liam, with his messy brown hair and serious eyes, looked like a miniature version of Ethan. Sophie, with her pigtails and a stuffed bunny dangling from her hand, was staring at the ground. "Aunt Claire," Liam said, his voice small, "Mom and Dad said we're staying with you for a while." I blinked, trying to process. "What? Where's your mom?" I looked past them, expecting to see Jessica or Ethan, but the street was empty. Liam handed me a note, scrawled in Ethan's sloppy handwriting. Asterisk Claire, Jess and I need a break. You're good with kids, right? We'll be back in a couple months. Don't make a big deal out of this. A couple months? I was livid. Ethan and Jessica had just dumped their kids on my doorstep without so much as a phone call, expecting me to upend my life to play babysitter. I ushered Liam and Sophie inside, my mind racing. The kids looked confused, scared even, and I didn't want to upset them further. Okay, guys, I said, forcing a smile. Let's get you settled. Want some pancakes? As they nodded shyly, I grabbed my phone and called Ethan. No answer. I tried Jessica. Same. I left voicemails, each one angrier than the last, demanding they explain themselves. When I finally got through to Ethan that evening, he was nonchalant. Chill, Claire, he said. We're just taking a little vacation. You've got that big apartment, and you don't have kids of your own. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal? I shouted. You can't just abandon your kids. I have a job, Ethan, a life. If you don't come get them by tomorrow, I'm calling CPS. There was a long pause. Then Ethan's voice turned cold. You do that, and I'll make sure everyone at your fancy newspaper knows about your little breakdown in college. You think they'll keep you on when they hear you're unstable? My heart sank. I'd had a rough semester in college, struggling with anxiety and depression from years of family pressure. I'd taken a leave of absence to get help, and somehow Ethan knew about it. He was threatening to use my mental health against me, to jeopardize the career I'd built from nothing. I hung up, my hands shaking. I looked at Liam and Sophie, who were watching cartoons on my couch, oblivious to the storm brewing. They were innocent, caught in their parents' recklessness. I couldn't let them suffer, but I also couldn't let Ethan control me. I needed a plan. The fight begins. The next few days were a blur. I took a week off work, citing a family emergency, and focused on making Liam and Sophie feel safe. They were sweet kids, polite but guarded, like they'd learned to expect disappointment. Liam was quiet, always watching, while Sophie clung to her bunny and asked for her mom every night. I bought them clothes, toys, and books, trying to fill the void their parents had left, but every moment I spent with them, my anger at Ethan grew. I called my parents, hoping they'd intervene. My mother, as always, took Ethan's side. He's under a lot of stress, Claire, she said. You should be helping your brother, not making things harder. My father, predictably, stayed silent. When I pressed my mother about where Ethan and Jessica had gone, she admitted they were in Cancun, taking some time to work on their marriage. The entitlement was staggering. They'd abandoned their kids for a 2-month tropical getaway, expecting me to pick up the pieces. I contacted a lawyer friend, Sarah, who specialized in family law. She confirmed that Ethan's actions constituted abandonment and that I could report him to Child Protective Services. But she warned me it wouldn't be easy. You'll need evidence, she said. Document everything, texts, voicemails, that note, and be prepared for a fight. Your brother doesn't sound like someone who backs down. I took her advice to heart. I recorded every conversation with Ethan, saved every text, and kept a journal of the kids' time with me. I also reached out to my therapist, who helped me navigate the emotional toll of the situation. I was terrified, not just of Ethan's threats, but of failing Liam and Sophie. They deserved better than a mother who saw them as burdens, and a father who thought he could do whatever he wanted. A week into their stay, Ethan called again. You enjoying playing mom? He sneered. Better get used to it, because Jess and I are extending our trip. I was floored. Extending it? They hadn't even checked on their kids. I kept my voice calm, knowing I was recording. Ethan, you can't just leave your kids here. I'm not their parent. If you don't come back, I'll have no choice but to involve CPS. On. He laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. Go ahead, Claire. Call CPS. I'll tell them you're the one who's unfit. I'll say you're neglecting the kids, that you're too unstable to care for them. Who do you think they'll believe? The golden boy or the sister who's always been a mess? I hung up, my heart pounding. He was escalating, and I knew he'd follow through on his threats. But I also knew I couldn't back down. For the first time in my life, I felt a fire in me, a determination to protect Liam and Sophie, no matter the cost. The breaking point. 2 weeks later, things took a darker turn. I'd enrolled Liam and Sophie in a local daycare so I could return to work, but I was struggling to balance my job with their needs. My editor was supportive, but I could tell my absence was straining things at the newspaper. I was exhausted, emotionally and physically, and Ethan's threats loomed over me like a storm cloud. Then, one evening, I came home to find my apartment door ajar. My heart stopped. I told Liam and Sophie to stay in the car and crept inside, phone in hand, ready to call 911. The place was trashed, books torn from shelves, dishes smashed, my laptop screen cracked. On the wall, in red spray paint, were the words, "Back off, Claire." I called the police, who took a report but said there was little they could do without evidence of who did it. I knew it was Ethan, or someone he'd sent. He was trying to scare me into submission. I moved Liam and Sophie to a hotel that night, terrified he'd come back. The next day, I installed security cameras and changed the locks, but the damage was done. I felt violated, unsafe in my own home. I called Sarah again, and she urged me to file for a restraining order. "This is harassment, Claire," she said. "And with the kids involved, you need to act fast." I filed the paperwork, but Ethan was still in Cancun, unreachable by the courts. Jessica, meanwhile, had started posting cryptic messages on social media about family betrayals and knowing who's really loyal. It was clear they were building a narrative to discredit me. The kids were my anchor through it all. Liam started opening up, telling me about his parents' fights, how they'd leave him and Sophie alone for hours while they partied. Sophie would crawl into my bed at night, clutching her bunny, and whisper, "Are you gonna keep us, Aunt Claire?" Each time I'd hug her tight and say, "I'm doing everything I can, sweetie." But the truth was, I didn't know if I could. I wasn't their mother, and the legal system was a maze I wasn't sure I could navigate. The legal battle. I finally called CPS, armed with my recordings, texts, and Ethan's note. The caseworker, a kind but overworked woman named Maria, listened as I explained the situation. She took the kids' statements, which broke my heart. Liam described how his dad would yell at him for being weak, and Sophie said she was scared to go home because Mommy gets mad a lot. Maria assured me they'd open an investigation, but warned it could take months. When Ethan and Jessica returned from Cancun, they were furious to learn I'd involved CPS. Ethan showed up at my apartment, banging on the door and yelling for the kids. I called the police, who escorted him away, citing the restraining order. But the damage was done. Liam and Sophie were shaken, and I knew Ethan wouldn't stop. The custody battle that followed was grueling. Ethan and Jessica hired a lawyer, paid for by my parents, who painted me as an unstable workaholic who couldn't handle kids. They used my college breakdown against me, twisting it into a story of mental instability. I countered with my evidence, years of medical records showing I was stable, letters from my therapist and employer, and the recordings of Ethan's threats. Sarah was a fierce advocate, arguing that Ethan and Jessica's abandonment and neglect made them unfit parents. The kids were placed in temporary foster care during the investigation, which tore me apart. I visited them as often as I could, bringing Sophie's bunny and Liam's favorite books. Each visit, they'd cling to me, begging to come home. I promised them I'd fight, but I was terrified of losing. The turning point. The trial was a nightmare. Ethan played the charming golden boy, spinning a story about how he and Jessica just needed a short break and trusted me to care for their kids. My mother testified on his behalf, claiming I'd always been jealous of Ethan and was trying to steal his children. It was a gut punch, but I wasn't surprised. What turned the tide was the kids' testimony. Liam, at 8 years old, stood in front of the judge and described his parents' neglect in heartbreaking detail. Sophie, too young to testify formally, drew pictures for the caseworker, dark scribbles of her parents yelling while she hid under her bed. The judge's face softened as he listened, and I saw a flicker of hope. Then came my turn. I laid out everything: the years of favoritism, Ethan's entitlement, the abandonment, the break-in. I played the recordings, which made Ethan's lawyer wince. I spoke about Liam and Sophie, how they deserved a stable home, how I'd grown to love them like my own. By the end, I was crying, but they were honest tears, not the crocodile tears my mother shed on the stand. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me temporary custody while Ethan and Jessica underwent parenting classes and evaluations. It was a victory, but it came at a cost. My relationship with my parents was severed. They blamed me for tearing the family apart. Ethan swore he'd never forgive me. But when Liam and Sophie ran into my arms, their faces lit with relief, I knew I'd made the right choice. A new beginning. Life with Liam and Sophie wasn't easy. They had nightmares, trust issues, and moments of anger at their parents. But we built a routine: school, therapy, movie nights. I decorated their room in my apartment, filling them with color and comfort. Liam started playing soccer, and Sophie discovered a love for drawing. Slowly, they began to heal. I kept my job at the newspaper, but I scaled back my hours to focus on the kids. My editor, impressed by my resilience, gave me a column to write about family dynamics and overcoming adversity. It became a platform to share my story, to connect with others who'd felt invisible in their families. I heard from readers who'd been through similar struggles, and their messages gave me strength. Ethan and Jessica faded from our lives. They lost interest in the parenting classes, and their visits with the kids dwindled. My parents tried to guilt me into reconciling, but I held firm. I'd spent too long seeking their approval. Now, my focus was on giving Liam and Sophie the love I'd never had. Years later, at Sophie's high school graduation, I sat in the audience, tears in my eyes as she walked across the stage. Liam, now in college, was beside me, cheering for his sister. They'd grown into kind, resilient people, and I like to think I'd had a hand in that. As Sophie hugged me after the ceremony, she whispered, "Thanks for saving us, Aunt Claire." I didn't cry then. I'd learned to be strong for them. But my heart swelled.